Thank you very much for the introduction and for hosting this meeting and for the opportunity to address you and discuss a very important topic, a focus on foods, obesity, and diabetes. And my question, which I think the answer is very clearly no, is are all calories created equal? I would say no, they are not created equal. Let's move on. Let's try this again. Left and right mouse button, there we go. So we have recently contributed to some analyses looking at the modifiable causes of death in the United States and in every country around the world, including Mexico. These are the results for the United States published in JAMA last year. And what we found, along with a large group of international collaborators, is that dietary risks are now the leading cause of poor health in the United States, in Mexico, and in almost every country around the world. So dietary risks now exceed tobacco smoking as the #1 cause of poor health. There are some exceptions, sub-Saharan Africa, some of the poorest countries in South Asia where there's still enormous burdens from malnutrition and maternal and child and infectious diseases. But everywhere else in the world, almost every other country in the world, including the United States and Mexico, poor diet is now the single leading cause of poor health. So this is really the defining public health and health challenge of the next 10 years. So if we want to look at, I should say that most of this, if you look at the diseases that are caused by diet, most of this is blue here, and blue is really chronic diseases, cardiovascular, circulatory diseases, and diet-related cancers. So if we want to think about cardiometabolic risk, not just diabetes, but cardiovascular risk, we have to think of the continuum of risk factors. What are really the fundamental risk factors we should be addressing? Of course, over time, death is the worst outcome. There's a range of clinical outcomes from cardiovascular disease, coronary disease, heart failure, stroke, cognitive decline, renal failure, peripheral arterial disease, among others. There's symptoms and disability. There's intermediate risk factors such as high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, and so forth. There's obesity, which is a key risk factor, of course, for diabetes, endothelial dysfunction, and metabolic dysfunction. But the fundamental risk factors at the individual level, for the person, the fundamental risk factors for cardiometabolic disease are poor diet, physical inactivity, and smoking. These are the true risk factors for cardiometabolic disease. So I don't even think really we should be talking about obesity as the risk factor for diabetes. Obesity is not the risk factor for diabetes. Obesity is the pathway, is the symptom of poor lifestyle. Similarly, we shouldn't be talking about dyslipidemia, hypertension, and diabetes as risk factors for coronary heart disease. They're intermediates along the pathway. The true fundamental risk factors at the individual level are poor diet, physical inactivity, and smoking. We don't have to do any complex tests or expensive surveys or randomized controlled trials to know that what the fundamental causes of the obesity epidemic and the diabetes epidemic are. It's not genetics. Our genes have not changed in the last 20 or 30 years. It's not the healthcare system. The healthcare system hasn't changed in the last 20 or 30 years. If anything, it's gotten better. So what has changed in the last 20 or 30 years across the world is lifestyle. And fundamentally, the most important thing that has changed in most countries is diet. Physical activity has also decreased, especially in low-income countries. But in the United States, for example, over the last 30 years, physical activity has gone up a little bit, not gone down, at the same time the obesity epidemic. So in the United States, it's almost all driven by diet. In most countries, it's a combination of physical activity and diet. So we know the causes. And the reason this is so important is we have to really think about, what we're doing in our healthcare system and with our research and with our science. Are we really focusing on the fundamental causes? We're focusing on obesity in this talk, but as I said, we really should be focusing down here. And I want to use the example of John Snow. John Snow, who in London, in the middle of the cholera epidemic, went and mapped out all the cases of cholera in London. And he found that if he mapped all the cases of cholera in London, that they centered on a single water pump in London, right? The single water pump that he said, this must be the source of this cholera. They hadn't identified the cholera bacteria yet, but he said it must be this water pump. So imagine what would have happened if John Snow had said, well, that's great. Now we need to spend tens of millions of dollars to go genotype all the people, all the citizens in London to find out the genetic risk factors for cholera and look at gene-environment interactions. And then when he found, as he would have, that only a few % of the variance in the risk of cholera was explained by genes. He said, well, now let's go spend tens of millions of dollars more looking at epigenetics and DNA methylation. That's really the cause of cholera. And when that didn't work out, he said, well, we need to build healthcare systems to treat the cholera. That's the fundamental thing we need to do. We need better screening. We need to identify the high-risk individuals and screen and treat them and have them avoid the water pump. That's what we need to do. Or we need better adherence to the medications. We need to develop systems for better adherence. These are all the things we're doing now to try to address obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, right? What did John Snow do? He went to the policymakers. He said, take the handle off the pump. Right? That's what he did to eliminate. He went to the root cause. So I think to address obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular disease, we're not going to do it through the healthcare system. We're not going to do it through genetics and epigenetics. Those things are important. Those things do have some small effect, but very small effects and very expensive effects. To address obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases, we're going to have to address the root causes. The root causes are lifestyle. And the root causes of lifestyle are outside the healthcare system. So everything that was discussed in the first two talks is important, but it's important as a very, very minor contributor to what we have to do to really address the causes. We have to go to our policymakers and tell them to take the handle off the pump. So with that introduction and perspective, we first need to understand now diet, which I think is the single leading cause of obesity and diabetes. What's the conventional wisdom been over the last 10 or 20 years? The conventional wisdom has been that it's just a problem of calories. We're just eating too many calories. That it's a problem of balance. Energy out, energy in, and energy is imbalance, and that's what's leading to type 2 diabetes. And if anything specific was focused upon, it was really fat, or energy density, which is calories per gram, which is mostly code for fat. And the reason that was focused on is that there's more, calories for every gram. And this is really what's driven our policies and what's driven our science. And so the diabetes prevention program, the Look Ahead trial, the Finnish diabetes prevention program, their main goal was weight loss through calorie reduction. And if they advised anything in the diet, it was to reduce total fat and saturated fat. It was really a calorie-focused intervention. And so I think the DPP was successful because it did increase physical activity and reduce weight a little bit, but it was terribly less successful than it could have been if it had focused on diet quality rather than just calories. And I'm going to argue and show you that calories is the wrong focus, right? Why have we increased our calorie intake in the last 30 years? Are we more hungry biologically than we were 30 years ago? Our biology hasn't changed, right? So what has changed? Again, we have to really think, what are the root causes of the changes in our diet? Why are we eating more calories, right? And so I think if we look at the root causes, I think there's a fairly short list of the root causes. By far the biggest component of the root cause of our increased caloric intake is a decrease in the quality of our diet. So the poor diet quality is the root cause. There's also increased television watching, and there's randomized trials showing that increased television watching acts on obesity through diet, not through physical activity. It changes how much we eat, it changes snacking in front of the TV, the marketing influences choices. We're sleeping less, and changes in sleep influence how much we eat. And many similar things like that. But we have to really think of the root causes. The number one root cause, as I'm going to argue, is change in diet quality. So we've had remarkable advances in nutrition science which allow us now, compared to even 10 years ago, to say very different things about diet and obesity. In addition to ecologic studies and animal experiments, we have good randomized controlled trials and prospective cohorts of outcomes. And so that's led to what I would say is a more modern view of obesity and diabetes, which this modern view needs to now enter our clinical practice and our public policy. Certainly energy in and energy out influences obesity, but there's diet quality is the number one driver of energy in, overall in the long term. And really the key factors are carbohydrate quality, intakes of whole foods like nuts and fruits and vegetables, specific fats and oils, and overall dietary patterns. But crucially, diet quality has many, many more effects. So regardless of your weight, regardless of your obesity, diet quality has huge impacts on your metabolic risk. So you can be obese and have very, very high metabolic risk based on a poor diet, and you can be lean and have very, very high metabolic risk based on a poor diet, and vice versa. You can be obese or lean and have lower metabolic risk. So independently, and this has been shown in many randomized controlled trials, that diet patterns have a major impact on metabolic risk independent of obesity. In addition, independent of total BMI and total energy, calorie for calorie, different dietary factors influence visceral adiposity. They influence liver fat production, hepatic de novo lipogenesis. In particular, rapidly digestible carbohydrates activate de novo lipogenesis and influence adiposity, as do trans fats. And finally, the most interesting thing, and I'm going to show you one trial that looked at this, is the quality of the diet actually influences your energy out. It influences our metabolic expenditure, at least in trials up to 1 month. We need longer-term trials to confirm this. But that's a paradigm-shifting piece of science, that the diet quality not only influences energy in, but influences energy out. So diet quality is the root cause of obesity and diabetes. It's one of the major root causes. Now, if we want to look at short-term weight loss in obese people, this is one trial. You could look at many similar trials. Many trials have looked at this. You can go on almost any diet and lose weight in the short term because you're paying attention and you're dropping your calories. So for short-term weight loss, calories are the big player. You know, I concede that. That is true. And that's why all of these fad diets work. You can be on a low-fat diet. You can be on an Atkins diet. You can be on a paleo diet. You can be on an avocado diet. You could be on a jelly bean diet. You could be on any diet you want for 6 months and you'll lose weight. Because calories matter for short-term weight loss. But long-term, all the trials have shown some return toward baseline. So I think we need to move away from just thinking about secondary prevention and think about primary prevention. As a cardiologist, I've seen the field of cardiology move away from treatment of acute MI to prevention of acute MI. That's the major focus. We need to do the same thing for obesity. Instead of focusing so much on treatment of obese and overweight patients, we need to say what is causing the obesity in the population long term and move to prevent that. So preventing long-term weight gain is challenging to study. The average adult that's not obese gains about ½ a kilogram per year. It's a very, very small, very subtle weight gain. If you're obese, it's about double that. You gain about 1 kilogram per year on average. So this is very, very small, but this is what causes the obesity epidemic in Mexico. This is what causes the obesity epidemic in the United States and in the world. This adds up over time. So there's two very important things to realize when we think about this slow weight gain over time. The first is that none of us in this room have any idea what's causing or not causing this slow weight loss because it's so gradual. Right? You might have a big meal and do something this week, but the next week you do something different. The next month you do something different. You go on vacation. You have dinner with your friends. You don't eat that much for one day because you're sick. The sum of all of those things over time is what's causing this slow weight gain. So it's very hard for you to perceive what's causing it, which is why it's been so hard to prevent. The second thing that's really important, and I really want to emphasize too, is that the human body actually is remarkably good at compensating for our terrible food environment. We have a terrible food environment in most countries, right? With all of the marketing, all of the food availability, the huge meals, the huge lunch I just had. I had 2 plates. That was delicious. You go on vacation, you eat, we drink. With all of that, we compensate. We compensate amazingly well. The average person compensates amazingly well. Our physiology compensates. So I think what's important to understand is the obesity epidemic over the last 30 years is driven fundamentally by very, very small changes and failures to compensate. It's very small, subtle failures to compensate over 30 years. So what's causing those small failures to compensate? I'm going to argue that it's diet quality. So this is one analysis we did to look at weight change long-term in people who are not obese at baseline. We looked at 3 different cohort studies, the Nurses' Health Study, Nurses' Health Study 2, and Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. Over 120,000 men and women in these 3 cohorts. They were followed for 20 years with repeated measures of diet, repeated measures of weight. And we looked at the weight change, long-term weight gain associated with increasing intake of various foods. And so we looked at potatoes, potato chips, sweets and desserts, fruits, vegetables, beverages, and so forth. If all calories were equal, then all foods should be associated with weight gain if you increase their intake. And if you decrease their intake, all foods should be associated with weight loss. But that's not what we found. What we found is that some foods were associated with weight gain the more you eat. Some foods were not associated with weight gain or weight loss the more you eat. And some foods were actually associated with weight loss, relative weight loss, the more calories you ate. So what were the foods most associated with weight gain? potatoes and fries, and that included boiled and baked and mashed potatoes that were low fat, sweets and desserts and refined grains, and very importantly, the weight gain associated with sweets and desserts was exactly the same as the weight gain associated with refined grains. So candy and bread associated with the same weight gain, and that's very consistent with metabolic evidence of the rapidity of digestion of white bread. It's just like eating candy. And sugar-sweetened beverages was the #1 beverage associated with weight gain, and alcohol and 100% fruit juice as well. So you can see most of the foods associated with weight gain were carbohydrates. Now, what was the size of these effects? Very small, very small. This is the weight change in pounds over 4 years associated with every increased daily serving of these foods. So if you increased your daily serving of a dessert, or you increased your daily serving of a grain by 1 serving per day, 7 servings per week, right? On average, you gained about 0.7 pounds more in 4 years. Okay, so these are very, very small, subtle effects. But these small, subtle effects added up in these populations fully explain their weight gain over time because they were doing multiple things at the same time. Now, what foods were relatively neutral? Well, interestingly, cheese was relatively neutral. You increased the intake, you didn't gain or lose weight. Low-fat milk, you increased the intake, you didn't gain or lose weight. And whole-fat milk, just like low-fat milk, you increased the intake, you didn't gain or lose weight. And diet soda, you increased the intake, you didn't gain or lose weight. And then finally, there were several foods, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, fruits, and yogurt. The more you ate, the more calories you ate, the less weight you gained, right? So these were the superfoods that defied the laws of thermodynamics, right? So is that what's happening here? Do I think these foods are making our bodies melt away? No. This is compensation. This is evidence of compensation. Inability to compensate, to overcompensate, or to undercompensate. Certain foods interact with our bodies, and we don't compensate fully for their calories. So over time, over a year, over 2 years, over 10 years, we don't fully compensate for those calories and we gain weight. Other foods like cheese and whole milk and skim milk, we compensate pretty well. So if you increase the intake over time, you compensate roughly appropriately for their calories. And other foods, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, fruits, and yogurt, you actually compensate less for their calories in a sense, that the more you eat, you decrease your overall calories over the course of a year. Now, it sort of makes sense. If you eat 100 calories of carrots or 100 calories of broccoli, right, it's not going to have the same risk of long-term weight gain as 100 calories of Coke or 100 calories of Pepsi. Just on face value, it makes sense. But yet, our science, our policy, our guidelines all push counting calories, focusing on total calories. I'll just give you one example, low-fat salad dressing or fat-free salad dressing. This is what's recommended in the United States for people to have, is fat-free salad dressing. Do people have fat-free salad dressing or see fat-free salad dressing in Mexico? It's very popular in the United States. What's fat-free salad dressing, right? Salad dressing should be oil. If it's fat-free, it's just starch, salt, and sugar. So it's being promoted as a healthier choice than regular salad dressing, which is healthy vegetable oil, because it's lower in calories. Baked potato chips, another example, right? Baked potato chips are lower in calories than regular potato chips. They're promoted as a healthier option. What's a baked potato chip? Starch and salt. They've taken out the good ingredient, vegetable oil, usually soybean or canola oil, which is good for your health, and they're promoting at lower calories. In the United States, the school lunch program has banned whole milk. Whole milk is not allowed in the school lunch program anymore, but chocolate skim milk is okay, right? I mean, you laugh and I laugh, but I'm horrified. This is the law of the land because chocolate skim milk has lower calories than whole milk. So this calorie focus, do they have calorie labeling on menu boards here? Right? So the implicit notion is that you can look at a range of foods and judge them based on their calories. So it's obvious that foods are not equal in relation to their calories, and yet that's what our policies and our trials and our prevention programs are focused on. So carbohydrate quality is clearly a major driver. Potatoes, refined grains, sweets, sugar-sweetened beverages, all associated with weight gain. Whole grains, vegetables, fruit, not associated with weight gain. So how do we define carbohydrate quality? Well, it's challenging to define simply because carbohydrate quality includes its fiber content, its whole grain content, the glycemic response, and whether it's liquid versus solid. All of those things can be altered independently. So the best would be to eat a true whole grain that's a solid, that has a low glycemic response, that has a lot of fiber. But there's a few foods like that actually, so it's hard to define simply. And so one analysis that looked at this as a best rule of thumb for choosing high-quality carbohydrates looked at the industry-sponsored whole grain stamp, 3 USDA recommended definitions, which were all based on reading the ingredients list, or third, looking at the ratio of total carbohydrate to fiber per serving, which is the American Heart Association 2020 goals metric. And what they found among these different ways to choose a high-quality carbohydrate in terms of its calories, its sugar content, its sodium content, its trans fat content, that the best was actually the ratio of total carbohydrate to fiber, because this captured the overall quality of the carbohydrate. And so if there's more than 10 grams of carbohydrate per 1 gram of fiber, avoid. Less than 10 to 1 is a good choice, and less than 5 to 1 is a great choice. And let me show you an example to make this more clear. So I'm showing you 3 popular products: Kellogg's Corn Flakes, Kashi Good Friends, which is a whole grain cereal, and Kashi Soft Baked Cookies, which is a sweet cookies also by Kashi. If you look at sugars, added sugars or total sugars, which many people are recommending that we focus on added sugars in foods, Corn Flakes only has 2 grams of sugars, Kashi Good Friends has 10 grams of sugars, and the cookie has 7 grams of sugars, right? So you would say Corn Flakes is the best choice. But Corn Flakes is just refined cornstarch. It's just starch. In your mouth, your amylase starts to digest it to glucose. It gets into your stomach, and within minutes, it's just free glucose, and you have a very rapid glycemic response. Kashi Good Friends is wheat bran, granola, brown rice, and it has a little bit of cane juice and other things to make the whole grains tasty. But this is actually a very healthy whole grain product. And similarly, the soft-baked cookies are actually, again, whole grain oats, whole wheats, rye, brown rice, raisins, canola oil, very, very healthy ingredients. So if you look at the ratio, what's the ratio here? The ratio here of carbohydrate to fibers in Corn Flakes is 24 to 1, right? 24 to 1 is far above 10, not a good choice. The ratio here of Kashi Good Friends, carbohydrate to fiber, is about 3.5 to 1, 42 to 12. A very good ratio. This is a good product, less than 10. And even the cookie, the ratio of carbohydrate to fiber is 5 to 1. So the cookie is a better choice for your breakfast than the Corn Flakes, with whole grain oats, true whole grains, and a little bit of sweet honey and healthy vegetable oils. So this is why focusing on just calories or focusing on just sugars will lead to misleading choices. So why are these foods having different effects on our weight gain? Well, I initially thought that maybe this is just fullness. Maybe this is just satiety, right? Certain foods will just take longer to digest, and they just make you more full. And there are many trials showing that different foods have different effects on fullness. But since in the last 5 years, there's been an explosion of research in this area, and there's been many, many trials showing that calorie for calorie and calorie-matched randomized trials, different foods have different effects, not only on hunger and fullness, but on insulin, adrenaline, and other hormonal responses, on de novo lipogenesis, fat production in the liver, on activation of brain reward, on our microbiome interactions, which are gut microbiota, and even, as I mentioned, on metabolic expenditure. So I'm just going to quickly show you some of these studies, just a handful of some of these studies. There's many studies. This is an observational study, one of the oldest ones, now published about 10 years ago, looking at different dietary fats, energy for energy, and gain in waist circumference among 16,000 men, followed for 9 years. And very interestingly, total fat, saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat had very little association with weight gain in terms of waist circumference. But trans fats, interestingly, very positive relationship with weight gain. A second cohort in women, a different study looked at this a few years later, found exactly the same thing. And then in 2007, this long-term trial in green monkeys and non-human primates was published, where they looked at 8% energy of cis versus trans fats fed to these monkeys for 6 years. And these were calorie-controlled diets. They fed the monkeys the same calories in the two groups. Even though they fed the monkeys the same calories, the monkeys in the trans group gained weight, and when they did abdominal CTs, this was all due to increased abdominal or visceral fat. And since this time, animal experiments have shown that trans fats activate de novo lipogenesis in the liver. They activate fat production in the liver. They're the only fat to do that. Other fats suppress fat production in the liver. Trans fats activate de novo lipogenesis in the liver. So calorie for calorie, they increase visceral adiposity. This is another trial just looking at carbs, low carbohydrate versus high carbohydrate diets. They took 18 subjects with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They gave them calorie-controlled diets to give them equal 5% weight loss. Their goal was to give them equal 5% weight loss over 2 weeks. When they looked at 2 weeks at weight change in kilograms or weight change in percent, they did find a similar 5% weight loss, which was their goal. Their goal was to get a similar 5% weight loss. Yet, on the low carbohydrate diet, they had a nearly 60% reduction in hepatic fat measured by NMR. Whereas just on the regular low-calorie diet, they had only about a 25% reduction in hepatic fat. So calorie for calorie, weight for weight, there's an effect of food on our metabolism, on our body's function. This is a trial looking at brain reward activation. Previous trials had compared chocolate milkshakes to broccoli and found chocolate milkshakes light up the brain and broccoli doesn't, and this has led to this idea of craving. That's a kind of an unfair comparison, right? Because there's lots of social, emotional, memory determinants of drinking a chocolate milkshake versus something else. So this was a very nice trial because this was the first trial to give identical appearing, identical tasting liquid test meals. They were liquid, they tasted the same, they looked the same, you could not tell these apart. The only difference in these two was glycemic index. They had the same macronutrients, the same calories, the same palatability, and the same sweetness. And they found significantly greater hunger rating after the meal in the people who had consumed the higher glycemic index test meal. And they found activation of brain craving and brain reward in the people who had the higher glycemic index test meal. So calorie for calorie, just the changing the glycemic index made these people hungrier and made them crave food more in the long term. Diet quality alters microbiome function. So we showed in our analysis that I showed you that yogurt was associated with less weight gain. And that was puzzling. That had never been shown before. Cheese was neutral, milk was neutral, yogurt was associated with less weight gain. The major difference of yogurt versus the other dairy foods is active bacterial cultures. Since that time, several animal experiments have shown that yogurt and the active probiotics in yogurt interact with the microbiome in animal experiments. I'm sure now this will be done in human experiments. This is one example. This was a trial in rats where they were given various diets, control diets plus the active probiotic, or a Western kind of fast food diet, or the fast food diet plus the active probiotic. And they found that there was markedly less weight gain. This is the epididymal fat of two example rats. There was markedly less fat and less weight gain in the monkeys who were either fed yogurt in addition or were actually just fed the active probiotic in water. And what they found was that the microbiome composition didn't change. Total calorie consumption didn't change. The rats had equal total calorie consumption. What changed was changes in microbiome function. The active probiotics altered the host immune system, and in genetic knockout models, they showed that this was dependent on CD4 cells and interleukin 10. So very, very complex effects of diet on physiology. This is the last example I'm going to show you of the physiology. Diet quality alters energy expenditure. This was a trial that was prospectively designed based on prior post-hoc analyses of trials to test the idea that changing the quality of the diet alone changes metabolic expenditure. So they took test subjects, they did a run-in phase for 12 weeks, they had them achieve weight loss, they had them achieve weight stabilization, so they all lost about 10% of their body weight, and then they put the same subjects on 3 random crossover diets, test A, test B, and test C, 4 weeks each, and they measured their metabolic expenditure using doubly labeled water, and they measured their physical activity using multiple accelerometers. What they showed is after weight loss, on the typical, this is their baseline total energy expenditure, was about 3,200 calories per day. These were obese subjects. And what they showed is on the low-fat diet, when they're in their maintenance phase, their total energy expenditure dropped based on doubly labeled water by about 400 calories per day. This has been shown many times in the past, right? This is this idea of the weight thermostat, or the weight set point, that if you lose weight, your metabolic rate goes down, you get tired, you get hungry, and you start gaining weight again. This has been seen before. Yet those same subjects, when they were fed a low glycemic load diet, which had carbohydrates but slowly digested carbohydrates, their metabolic expenditure only decreased about 250 calories. And when they were fed an Atkins-style diet, a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, their metabolic expenditure only decreased about 100 kilocalories or less. So the same people on calorie-controlled diets had nearly a 300-calorie difference in their metabolic expenditure on these 3 different diets. Their physical activity was unchanged based on accelerometers. So this was a direct effect of diet quality on energy out. And this is, of course, a 1-month trial. Now they're following this up and doing a long-term trial to see if this holds. But this is remarkable. 300 calories a day in an obese person trying to lose weight is a huge impact on their weight control. So in addition, I mentioned that we've just talked about weight gain and obesity, that diet has separate independent effects on metabolism. And so this is one analysis looking at the risk of diabetes with sugar-sweetened beverage intake, the risk associated with 1 drink per day versus almost none. This is the % increase in the risk of diets and follow-up. Just adjusting for age, there was nearly a doubling of the risk of diabetes in the people who drank sugar-sweetened beverages, about almost 100% higher risk. If you adjusted for a range of dietary risk factors, there was about an 85% higher risk of diabetes with people who drank sugar-sweetened beverages. If you adjusted for obesity, if you adjusted for BMI, you explained about half of the risk. So about half of the risk of sugar-sweetened beverages was due to obesity, was due to the weight gain. But about half of it was not. About half of the risk of sugar-sweetened beverages was independent metabolic adverse effects, which is totally consistent with their rapid glycemic effects, their dramatic rises in insulin you get with high doses of sugar-sweetened beverages, the activation of hepatic de novo lipogenesis, the activation of brain reward, all the things that I've showed you would predict that you'd independently have a separate effect on diabetes. So sugar-sweetened beverages are bad because they both increase obesity and they separately increase diabetes. And we did an analysis that I presented yesterday that in Mexico we estimate 24,000 excess deaths each year due to sugar-sweetened beverage intake in Mexico. This is processed meats and incident diabetes independently of calories. For every 100 grams per day of processed meats, nearly a 2-fold higher risk of incident diabetes. Nuts and incident diabetes, again, adjusting for calories. Nuts for every 4 servings per week are associated with a 13% lower risk of incident diabetes. And dairy foods and incident diabetes, very interesting. This is the EPIC cohort, 340,000 Europeans, 8 countries, 12,000 cases. Milk, almost no association with diabetes, neutral, just like we found for weight gain. Yogurt, a trend, 0.06 for lower risk of diabetes with more yogurt consumption, just like we found for weight gain. And cheese, remarkably, cheese, we didn't find any association with weight gain. They found an association with less incidence of diabetes. And cheese is fermented, and so maybe there's something about the fermentation, interaction with the microbiome, who knows? But confounding wouldn't explain this, because people who eat more cheese have worse diets, not better diets. So confounding wouldn't explain this. This is the opposite direction you'd expect from confounding. And all of these effects that I'm showing you have been confirmed in short-term metabolic trials. When you put people on healthier diets, lower processed meats, lower refined carbs, more fruits, more vegetables, more nuts, more dairy, they have better HDL, better triglycerides, lower glucose, lower insulin resistance, has been confirmed in many trials. And the Predimed trial, the Spanish Mediterranean diet trial, was a trial of a Mediterranean diet in about 8,000 Spaniards. That showed lower incidence of diabetes with the healthier Mediterranean diet without any significant weight gain. So what we need to do to prevent chronic disease, we need to focus on food patterns, not calories, food patterns. We need to increase calories from the good and decrease calories from the bad, rather than just telling people to count their calories and decrease calories. We have to increase calories in the population from fruits and vegetables and fish and vegetable oils, nuts, plain yogurt, and minimally processed whole grains. At the same time, we have to limit starches, refined grains, sugars, processed meats, sweetened drinks, trans fat, salt, and excess alcohol. So these are what we should be doing, increasing the good calories and reducing the bad calories. This focus we have on total calories, or this focus we have on total nutrients, leads to all sorts of misleading and paradoxic decisions. So a Subway sandwich, which is processed bread, processed meat, and processed cheese, is viewed as a healthy alternative, right? When in fact it's not. This light, low-fat, basically sugar, is viewed as a healthy choice. Baked potato chips, chocolate fat-free milk, turkey sausage links because they're lower fat, or fat-free, as I said, fat-free salad dressing. That to me is sort of the height of the paradox of the calorie focus. These are all terrible choices for health, yet with the calorie focus, these are what consumers are being driven to. And not only consumers, scientists are doing this. This is the existing NHLBI guidelines for families. This is what the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute is recommending to people for healthier families, for healthier kids. They have a program called Go, Slow, and Whoa foods. Go means eat these almost any time. Slow means eat these sometimes. Whoa means eat these once in a while, right? So these are the best. These be careful, and these just eat once in a while. So what are the foods they put on these lists? Well, on the go food, eat almost any time. Eat beef and pork almost any time as long as you trim it. Just cut the fat out, but eat it almost any time. Fat-free creamy salad dressing, fat-free mayonnaise, diet soda. Those are all excellent choices, right? In contrast, be careful with all vegetables with added fat, right? No distinguishing of the type of fat, right? Asparagus with a little bit of olive oil or canola oil or peanut oil. Avocados, be careful. Tuna canned in oil, which is healthy oil, usually soybean oil. Peanut butter, nuts, lots of evidence for benefits of peanut butter and nuts, be careful. Vegetable oils, olive oils, excellent for health, proven by the Predimed randomized controlled trial, be careful. They're in the same category as oven-baked French fries, ginger snaps, pretzels, and sports drinks. And then in the woe foods, be really, really careful, whole eggs cooked with fat and whole milk, right, are in the same category as cookies and cakes and regular soda, right? So this is what very smart, well-intentioned scientists do when they focus on nutrients or calories rather than thinking about foods in the big picture. And of course, industry can also manipulate this. And so they can put low calorie, which makes people think less weight gain, which is not true. Fat-free makes them think it's healthier, or low saturated fat makes them think it's healthier. So ultimately, if we want to address the root causes, we have to address the root causes of poor diet quality, the poor diet quality that we're all eating. And it's not just the individual that's making these choices. So industry wants us to believe this is just an individual choice. Even the public wants themselves to believe this is an individual choice, that each of us chooses what we eat. And I think that's really not true. At the individual level, you know, your education, your income, your nutritional knowledge and skills, your health status, your motivation, your sleep, your television watching, all influence our intakes, even at the individual level. Around that, the social and cultural norms, our social support, our social class, and our race and our ethnicity influence what we eat. Our community influences what we eat. What foods are available in the workplace? What foods are available in the school? What are the local stores? Accessibility to supermarkets and grocery stores. What types of restaurants are around us? Do we have access to transport? What's our socioeconomic status of our neighborhood? Then, of course, there's larger forces: agriculture, industry, market forces, land use, transportation, food production and distribution, industry incentives, lobbying, marketing and media, and issues of food safety. There's government influences, right? What are the government priorities? What are their agricultural policies? What are the food assistance programs they give? What are the school lunch policies they have? Well, how does the healthcare system address diet? And then there's even global influences outside the country. Multinational corporate lobbying, climate change, food availability, trade agreements. So, you know, this idea that our diets are an individual choice and all we should do is choose to walk away from the well in London, right, the cholera well, is just tell people to walk away from the well, right? That's a fallacy, right? This government needs to do something to change our food supply and change our food system. And so I think if we want to move forward, we need to learn from past public health successes. And lots of people have talked about tobacco, the example of tobacco, because in the United States, tobacco has been a big public health success. It's been reduced dramatically. And people have said, big food is big tobacco, and we need to use the same approach. So I actually think that that's not the right analogy. I think that there are, of course, some similarities, but I think big food is not big tobacco. Because with big tobacco, it's a fight to the death. There's one product, we don't want that product, and it's a battle between us and the companies to eliminate that product, right? With food, we need food industry. We are not going to supply enough food for 9 million people with locally grown organic gardens in our backyards, right? We need food industry, we need big production, and we need the industry. But we need to help them, give them incentives to make healthier food. So I think the better example than big tobacco is car accidents, deaths from car accidents. This is a graph from the United States from 1925 to 1995 of the deaths per million vehicle miles traveled. For every million vehicle miles traveled, how many deaths were occurring? From 1925 to 1995, the deaths per vehicle mile traveled in the United States were reduced by 90%, and I would guess it's very similar in Mexico. At the same time, the vehicle miles traveled were going up. Lots more drivers, lots more cars, many, many fewer deaths, right? So how did we do this in 70 years? This is a huge public health success, one of the unrecognized public health successes of the last century. Did we just put a sticker on the car and say, this car is dangerous? Did we just put a label and say, this car can go this fast and, you know, it might get in an accident? And did we just educate the person and say, drive safely? Here's guidelines how to drive. If we had just done that, we would have had a very small effect, right? But this is what we're doing now. This is our major focus in nutrition policies: education, labeling, guidelines, as though it's just the individual consumer, as though it's just the individual driver causing all of these deaths, right? So what did we actually do to achieve this success? We had an evidence-based, carefully planned, multi-component strategy that addressed the driver, addressed the car, addressed the road, and addressed the culture. So for the driver, we had education, we had licensing, we had laws like limits on phone use and texting, limits on how old you have to be to drive late at night or to drive with friends. Lots of things to address the car: active protection like seat belts, child seats, motorcycle helmets; passive protection, padded interiors, collapsible steering columns, shatterproof windshields, airbags; careful crash safety standards in terms of the bumpers and so forth; safety inspections. Lots and lots of things to address the road engineering, the angle, the grade of the curve at highways, guardrails, speed limits, stop signs, stop lights, caution signs. And we changed the culture with designated driver campaigns for alcohol use, drunk driving legislation, and private advocacy about drinking and driving, like for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So this is what we need to do for the food system. We need to address the driver, the consumer. We need to address the food product. We need to address the food environment, the work site and the school place and the grocery stores. And we need to address the culture of eating in terms of our choices of our foods. This is what the government needs to do. And this is a list of, from a systematic review we did for the American Heart Association, of evidence-based policy interventions for diet. We need to do all of these things simultaneously. It took 70 years to reduce the car accident deaths. It took about 50 years to reduce smoking. We know what to do now, right? This should take us 10 years. This should not take that long if we get together and ask the governments to do this. We do need sustained media campaigns. Education is part of the solution, but just part of the solution. We do need some labeling and information, but we also need multi-component, comprehensive school and workplace programs. We need changes in our economic incentives, and particularly important are subsidy strategies to lower prices of healthful foods and tax strategies to increase prices of less healthful foods. We need long-term changes in agriculture. We need restrictions on marketing to kids, and we need some direct bans for things like sodium and trans fat. And I highlight this because from our review, this has the strongest evidence. Economic incentives has the strongest evidence to change behavior. And Mexico is leading the world with its tax on sugar-sweetened beverages and snack foods. And so that's helpful. But they're not combining that with subsidy strategies to increase the good foods. So I think that Mexico needs to use all of the revenue from those taxes for prevention programs and subsidies to increase the intake of good foods, because you're only doing half the battle if you just try to decrease the less healthful foods. So thank you very much. This is my research team and collaborating faculty, and I guess during the discussion I'm happy to answer any questions.